Hi, and welcome to the Gritty Nurse Podcast, an unfiltered discussion related to health and healthcare. My name is Amy,
And my name is Sarah.
and we are your podcast hosts.
So if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, or any other podcast platform, don't forget to hit subscribe. You can also write us a review or a rating. And please be sure to follow us along on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter.
And also, our Gritty Nurse listeners, we just kind of want to let you know that we have a Patreon account. So, our Patreon account is Gritty Nurse. You can find us that way. And really, why we've decided to do this is because, as much as we're giving to you, we really want to make sure that we can maintain the quality of our episodes. And we do have a few small monthly costs. So, anything would really help. All right. So, Sarah, how about you tell them what we're going to talk about today?
We are actually going to talk about nursing and the legal system. So, kind of when you should lawyer up, what some indications might be that you need to speak to a lawyer. And then we also want to talk about, in general, how you can protect yourself from being sued. So, we wanted to sort of illustrate this with a story of a nurse that was involved with the legal system. And I mean, Amy, I think you have the story, so maybe I'll let you start with that.
All right. And I mean, we'll probably kind of, as we kind of have our discussion, talk about some of our personal experiences too, but let's kind of get into the story. So, I'm going to just say the name. So her name is Gita Proudman. I'm pretty sure you can Google search her name. This is one of the cases I know that has been widely spoken about. And I actually heard about this case for the very first time when I was a labor and delivery nurse myself. And our hospital organization was actually showing us the Gita Proudman story, which comes in like a 3-part series on YouTube about kind of what happened with her. So she was a nurse who worked in Toronto, 24 years old at the time. And I guess this was around 1998. So she was a labor and delivery nurse, and she kind of went in for her shift as any regular. I think it was a night shift that she started with, and it was an 8-hour shift. And she had come in the NICU. So I don't know if she was redeployed to NICU or whatever the case may be. There was a baby that was delivered that had quite severe facial deformities, and I think a brain anomaly as well. So I guess from a clinical standpoint, this baby really didn't have very good prospects for living out for a very long period of time. And I guess the estimated time of which this baby might die was probably short lived. I think they were saying that it could have been anywhere between hours to 2 weeks. But I think this baby was pretty much on its last leg. And there was some questions I guess Gita had for the other staff in terms of like how much supervision or how much care this baby has received. And when she went over the chart, she noticed that there was a do not resuscitate order on the chart, I guess indicating the level of impairment that this child had, and that there were also some things on the chart that had indicated the parents had seen the baby last at Sick Kids and really wanted not much to do with the baby at this time, or said their goodbyes. I'm not too sure which of the two it was, but essentially the parents were kind of out of the picture at this point. And I think Gita had spoken to her colleagues and her peers and kind of had took compassion and was kind of saying, like, has anybody been, paying attention to this baby? Yeah, I guess you think about it like you're in an ICU unit with like sick babies that are most likely going to live. And then there's this kind of one baby that has all these issues. And she realized that, this baby really wasn't getting much attention. And I guess, I think she said she found out later on that there was some more attention paid to it, but that wasn't the picture that was painted for her at the time. So, she thought that, this baby wasn't getting very much attention. The parents didn't kind of were MIA at this point. The baby was pretty much written off with the DNR orders, plus having all these severe issues. So she decided that, it's still life, right? So she was like, I want to give this baby a dignified death in terms of, well, sorry, that sounds really bad. I think what she wanted to do was she wanted to provide comfort and
In
compassion
the baby's
for
last
this
few
baby.
minutes of life, or
Um,
last few hours, right?
Right, because I think that last statement sounded horrible, but anyways, I think what she wanted to do is just, provide that aspect of nursing care that we all know about, which is empathy, compassion, the same thing that you would do for any palliative patient, whether it's holding their hand when they're passing, whatever the case may be. So she took it upon herself to ask, like, would it be appropriate for me to, hold the baby while this process is kind of unfolding. So she involved other people from the care team, and they were all like, yep, go ahead. You probably should take the baby to a more private area, um, outside of like where all the NICU action is happening. And yeah, just you could just be in the moment with the baby. So I believe that she was with the baby for, I think she said, about an hour, and at this time when she looked down to check the baby's vitals, they were gone. So she had gone out and explained what happened to um, the baby with the staff, and a lot of them were very understanding, very compassionate, knowing that this baby was probably going to pass within that shift. Um, and I guess they would have prepared the baby as per usual. She also did speak to another nurse, I guess, in passing, telling her kind of about what happened. And I think she said something along the lines of the baby died in my arms, or something to that
Mhm.
aspect. She carried out her shift, working with her colleagues, and nothing was said, and she went home, and that should have been like the end of the story, right? But it wasn't. So what happened was, I guess she was coming in for her next shift, and I think there were some people waiting for her. I think it was her nurse manager, and she said some other unknown person to her. And they were talking to her and asking her if she could kind of go over with them what happened with this baby. And she thought of it as like they're just asking because they're out of concern, because it was a very traumatic situation. It would have been something really, really difficult to see and deal with. So I guess they had asked her. She said she repeated the story several times to them, and kind of that was the end of that situation. But then they told her not to come in for a shift. So she was like, oh, okay. Maybe just another form of compassion. They're just like, hard shift, just take the day. So she goes home, and then, like, that's that.
I feel like there's already multiple red flags here, at least for me, but I guess
Yeah.
if you don't know the story and this is you, you might kinda think the same way Gita did, like, "Oh, this is fine," you know? People just wanted to ask questions, but I find it very odd that there was that many people that wanted to hear the story again, because if you think about the charting that we do when a baby passes away, never mind an adult, it is quite extensive. And for her to be questioned
Mm,
again and then sort of asked or requested to take the next shift off is a little bit odd to me, because I
yeah.
know that when your patient dies, a lot of times people do call in sick the next day, let's be honest, but I don't think that choice is ever presented to you. You have to sort of make that decision on your own.
Right. And it should neither be a reflection of the type of person that you are, whether you show up for your shift the next day or you don't, right? Like, I mean, I don't want
Right.
people to be like, "Oh, you're a cold-hearted biatch if you show up for work the next day." Like, you still have to feed your family and take care of your bills. So it's just a personal decision at that point. So, but I think
Mhm.
also her being kind of novice, I shouldn't say that word, I really hate it. Her being a newer nurse and being, relatively young. I think she was 24 at the time too, um, and just kind of new to the world of nursing and healthcare. I think some of those factors also contributed to what actually ended up happening with her. So I think she went home, and then she did receive another call, but this call now was actually from, I guess, ONA, and the I think it was just
And that
ONA.
stands
I
for
don't know if
that
it's
stands
ONA
for
and
Ontario
RNAO.
Nurses Association. So that's our,
So
local
yeah,
nurses
so
union. Yeah.
our union body. So, they had spoken to her and said, "Hey, we heard this had happened. They've sent you home. We're here for support and whatever you need." And essentially, they told her that, if things Here are the various different steps and stages. And I think the last thing they told her was, here is the name of a lawyer. And she was kind of like taken aback by that. She was like, oh, a lawyer? Like, what do I need a lawyer for? And they're like, listen, just take the information just in case that you may need a lawyer. And she's like, there's no reason that I need a lawyer. Like, I did everything that I needed to do, and I'm telling the truth.
Right.
And I think again, for me, that would have been like a like, they're telling me, but it might just be, a part of the process. So I think what happened was, a little bit later after that, the police actually contacted her and asked her if she would come down for questioning. And she was like, yeah, of course, I'll go talk to the police and have them ask me. I have nothing to hide. And I think she spent about an hour or an hour and a half with the police, kind of, again, going over the same situation over. And she said essentially like multiple times as to what happened and what transpired that day with the baby.
See, I feel like I
Um,
know she's really novice, but I feel like in this case, right, you've been basically your union is telling you to get a lawyer, and you just went for an hour questioning with the police. Even in my naive 24-year-old brain, I would have been freaking out, to be honest. And I know that we don't know all
well,
of
the
the
thing is,
details here, but like, wouldn't you at that point, wouldn't something clue into you that this is really unusual? I should be getting a lawyer. I should be getting legal advice. This is not normal what is happening right now.
I think everybody has their different points at which they're realizing that the shit was hitting the fan, right? I think she was probably quite traumatized by what had happened to her and was probably actually still processing over the last 48 hours or whatever the case may be. And I think between the time she was had that first session of questioning, she ended up having another line of questioning where essentially they questioned her for over 6 hours. So she wasn't arrested. She was not under arrest. She did not. So she was not under arrest at this time.
Okay, but I feel like you should make like in the movies or TV where it's like, I can't speak until I have my lawyer here. And even if you don't have a lawyer, you get one.
I think Canadians are different when it comes to lawyering up. Like, I feel like in the States, it's like, boom,
Mhm.
lawyer up.
That's
Like, this is
true.
crazy. Like, this seems, but I think, Canadians, we're trying to be friendly. We're trying to be like, oh, this is not happening to me, or I'm just trying to give them more information to
Or
help them with the
you
case or
don't
whatever
wanna,
that they
like,
might be.
inconvenience people or be seen as not trusting of the system or what have you.
Right, right,
Yeah,
right.
so we
Yeah,
both.
I actually forgot to mention that the other part that for me was surprising was they suspended her from work. So I forgot to mention that part. So after she had this conversation with the manager, whatnot, they suspended her from work. So it's like, I don't know if they suspended her with pay. I'm assuming that they didn't. Um, but that for me would have been like another like, what the hell is happening? And I think that's why probably Ona had contacted her as well.
Right,
So
right.
she ended up having this 6 hour questioning session with, I guess, these two police officers. And I think I think this is kind of where for her the red flag started going off for her, because essentially she had expressed that they had lied to her. They had said that the baby was, the coroner noted that the baby was asphyxiated. Um, that they're no matter how many times that she tells her story, that they were planning on getting the truth out of her that day. And she's just like, there is no more truth to give you. Like, I'm telling you all I know, all that's happened, and this is the situation. And I think she ended up leaving there. So after 6 hours they released her, but I believe like the next day they arrested her for second-degree murder of this infant.
Unreal.
And it was at that point where she was like, I think I need a lawyer. So she was, I think, arrested sometime. I can't remember the specific date, but I think it was like July, sometime early in July of 1998, and then ended up spending 9 days in prison. So I could
Oh
only
my god.
imagine how horrifying that would be. I mean, I think if we think about cases that have recently happened in the news where, I think, she likened this to just actually recently they spoke to her about this case, and she had said like, she's like, a police officer who killed, I think it was Sammy Yateen, wasn't arrested. Like, they gave him time to turn himself in, and then he was sent back home. Whereas with her, she was she did that, like, I guess 6-hour death interrogation, and they arrested her within the same evening. So she was like, I feel like there's a blue wall up, and maybe who knows what other factors there were that were at play. But so she was arrested, spent 9 days in prison, and then finally, at the bail hearing, the lawyer, or the judge, I should say, had deemed that she's not a threat to society. So they released her on bail. I don't think she discussed what her bail conditions were, but essentially, she was like, "Yeah, I need a lawyer. This is some
Right, right,
bullshit,
right.
right?"
Oh my god.
So, but it really only seemed to snowball and kind of get worse for her. So she did lawyer up at that point in time. I think they kind of put her through the ringer. Like, it was 18 months, I think, where she was kind of dealing with the fact that people were thinking she was guilty of doing harm to this infant. And what it ended up turning it out to be was, one of the people that she thought were most concerned for her said that what Gita said was, "Oh, she said that I want to give the baby a dignified death. I held my hand over the baby and watched the baby die." And she's like, "I never said those
Whoa.
words," right? Like,
Talk about twisting your
so, like,
words.
one of her own colleagues, one of the people that were kind of talking to her the most and trying to, confide and support her, was one of the ones that were saying, like, she's guilty of murdering this baby. And she's like, "I never said any of that stuff to this person." So what ended up happening was, on that day of her hearing, her first hearing, she mentioned how she walked into the courtroom, um, and essentially the courtroom was packed, and she's like, it was actually packed full of nurses that she didn't know. So her friends, her family, colleagues, nurses that she's never met before, ONA and the Registered Nurses Association of Ontario. So she was like, she felt the solidarity and support, because they were all like, this is like an outrage that this is happening to you. And then she said they watched in horror pretty much as they handcuffed her, took the handcuffs off, and then re-handcuffed her. And she's just like, it was probably um, like the worst time of her life. Again, I guess going through the legal proceeding aspects was just probably another part where they made various different accusations towards her, where police were saying that, like, yeah, she is guilty. And I mean, this is, I think, for anybody, that's a career shattering, life shattering experience. And it took 18 months for her to be exonerated. So it was like almost over 2 years that she had to kind of deal with this whole process until she was found not guilty.
That's incredible. Like, just imagine having to live this every single day when you know what you did and nobody else believes you. And it's just like your reputation, it's everything about you that's out in the open, right? And people are talking about you everywhere you go, and there's nothing you can really do about it. I kind of wonder, like, was she able to work during that time, or was she
No,
suspended the whole
she
time?
was suspended the whole time, right? And I think that's also, like, I mean, she did have bail, but, like, I mean,
Well, I mean,
her
that's
income and all, and then the fact that people were pretty much presuming her to be found guilty before the case was even tried. Like, I think that was a whole other, and the fact that some of her own colleagues were going against her, I think that's also something that didn't help, because, they're like, "Oh yeah, she said that." It's like, "No, she didn't." And it was just, I think, just one person that said that, because I think there were other nurses who testified differently than that. But I mean, for any, like, I couldn't imagine being charged with second-degree murder, knowing that I thought I did the best thing that I could have, was to, support and be with a dying child. But I mean, one of the things that she ends up saying is, she's like, "I would never ever hold or touch a dying child again." And I think that's, for someone who would work in labor and delivery or whatever, or the NICU, I think that's horrible, right? And I
yeah.
mean, I think I completely can empathize with her feeling that way, right?
Right, because when you were telling this story, I thought, yes, any nurse would do what she had done, I think. I mean, maybe not actually done what she did, but they would have had the urge to do what she did, because that is what we do as a profession, right? We're here to support, we're here to save lives, we're here to be with people as they're dying and make them as comfortable as possible. But I think there's a couple things that make this case really unusual, which is number one, that the family had pretty much decided they weren't going to be a part of this, which is,
Right.
I think, pretty unusual because I would say in 95% of cases, no matter what the situation is, the parents are always there. At least one parent's always there until the end, right? The parents are usually the ones holding the baby and spending their last moments together. So that didn't happen. And then the second thing is that even if a nurse was going to be that person to hold the baby until its last breaths, usually it's with other people around, right? So you're not just alone in a room with the baby. There's other witnesses as to what's happening so that there is no question about, what did you really do with that baby? So I think that part was also unusual, but I get how that could have happened because I'm sure everyone's busy with their assignments and maybe she just wanted to go somewhere quiet and relaxing for the baby, but it ended up really just biting her in the end.
Yeah, I think her being so naive kind of really struck a chord, right? And I think the fact of the matter is, I think one of the other things that she discussed was not feeling, she's like, the police are supposed to be there to protect you. And she's like, in this particular situation, they they almost seemed blinded to the fact that I was the only person that they would be looking to. Like she was just like they hyper focused on me as being this guilty person and made it out to be the truth when it wasn't in fact the truth. And she's like, that is entirely dangerous. And she's like, I can only imagine how many other people in the legal system that happens to, where they get these I'm trying to remember what the wording that she used was, but essentially it's kind of like deer in headlights, not deer in headlights, but it's kind of like, oh yeah, she said tunnel vision, where they just were like, it is you, you are the person, and wouldn't even like try to see that, there's something in between, and that this is not like
Yeah,
you aren't even seeking justice. You're seeking out the wrong person. So she was saying how she lost confidence and trust in the I guess the police force for that. And I mean, I totally get it, and I think we've heard it numerous times in various other cases where people have been wrongly prosecuted and spend years and years in prison. She was saying that she's thankful for the lawyer that she had, as well as the support from ONA and the Registered Nurses Association, because she's like, I would have, maybe those 9 days would have turned out to be a lifetime, right?
right, right. It's just so unusual for this to happen to a nurse. And I think that now that her story has been out there for a while, there's a lot that we could learn. And I think a lot that people have learned from this case. And I think for her, there's a number of times that she could have lawyered up much earlier than she did, right? And I'm sure that would have it probably would have changed the outcome, but the fact is that clinically there was no way that this baby was going to live
Right.
much longer anyway. And I think that they sort of made it seem like she hastened the baby's death when that's not
Right.
what she did at all. She did it out of the kindness of her own heart, and it's really unfortunate because of this case. I feel like people that know about this case probably wouldn't hold that baby and wouldn't give it comfort.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it would change. Like, I can't imagine it wouldn't have changed the way that people nursed after that time, right? Like, I think people were probably on like hyper vigilant to be like, hey, like, I just need to be very careful because I don't want someone to assume that this is what happened. I'd rather just let the baby lie there by themselves in the isolate, and then they die, and it's like, oh well, everyone saw it, so it's not my. But that's not what we're taught, right? That's not the type of compassion that we're told to give. So, but yeah, like, I mean, it's
Mhm.
a scary situation. And I think that being naive is not going to get you anywhere. It's going to get you to be like eaten by wolves. So, maybe this is where we could talk about the importance of knowing when to kind of lawyer up, right?
Yeah, and I think that in most cases, right, a lot of lawyers will do a free consultation. So it never hurts to just reach out and say, like, hey, do I need legal advice? Do I need representation? Because this is where it will just make it so much easier for you
Yeah.
going down the road, right? And the legal system just drags everything out for years and years. I mean, I just, yeah, I don't even know what to say about that. I just feel so bad for her and everyone that was involved, and it's just a really tricky thing. So, what do you think, Amy?
I think So one of the things that I kind of always think about, and I'm sure that like our Canadian and American listeners would know, is like there's a lot of litigation when it comes to maternal child. So when it comes to working in an environment like labor and delivery or pediatrics or neonatal intensive unit and even postpartum, that there is high risk for litigation. And I think again, like the same thing we continually urge our nurses to do is to really, yes, you need to know your rights in terms of your union rights, but also the importance of documentation. Like solid documentation is always one of the things that'll save you. And I think like even if I reflect on this case, like I mean, I'm sure her documentation was fine. It's just one of her colleagues were kind of essentially kind of turned into a Karen and went psycho on her and really messed things up for her. But again, like I think it's just being aware of um documentation, then just knowing like at what point should I lawyer up? So for example, I think maybe on previous episodes I talked about being in situations where one, we've seen it from both sides, right? So um whether we were in a leadership role and we saw cases coming through our programs that were going to be litigated, or for myself being in a situation where I was actively involved in a case that was being litigated. Like I think in my case it was different because I guess the parties were suing the hospital, and then they named the people who were working that shift. So we are named in the lawsuit as well. But my coverage is like I'm being covered by the hospital's lawyers, being protected by the hospital's lawyers. But I think in the Gita Proudman case, she didn't have that benefit because the investigation turned into a criminal one, right? So it went from being as opposed to negligence and maybe malpractice to second degree murder. So I think where my feelers would go up is the
Well, I
fact
think
of
it's about
whether the police wanted to speak to me or not, because I'd be like, oh, yeah. So at this point, I think I need a lawyer because there's no reason that I should be speaking to the police about a case in which I gave excellent care and I did all the things that I needed to do. I would lawyer up very quickly.
Well, and the fact is that it was only her that was questioned by the
Right.
police. It kind of like you said, it was like they had that tunnel vision to where she was being targeted because of some information they got from someone else, which turned
Mhm.
out to be false. But just going back to what you said about documentation, Amy, I think this is like we can't emphasize this enough because we have been involved in cases where the hospital has been sued by families, and in Canada at least, families have up to 20 years to come back to the hospital after the birth of a baby. If there were any sort of delays or sort of health issues that are chronic, that they can potentially attribute to the birth. That's why I think maternal child is so high. And I don't know the exact number, but I know that obstetricians, they can pay insurance rates in the five figures because of it's so prevalent in
Right.
this industry. And it's because I guess, like, for our, area, it's because when something happens at birth, right, you have a whole lifetime of care to pay for this child. I mean, like, depending on their abnormal or their deformity or whatever, they could live, a normal lifespan, which is, like, 70 or 80 years, and so you're looking at the millions. Um, I also think that documentation is sometimes your best and only defense. So if you think about it, 20 years ago, can you honestly say that you remember what happened or what
Yeah,
patients you
hells
had?
no.
No. So so you always have to document properly as though any case that you're in or any patient that you have, even if everything went well, if they were to come back to look at your charting, is there anything missing? Was there anything out of the ordinary that you didn't document? Like, what
Yeah.
does that look like? So I think that's really important.
And I think the other important aspect of this too is there are times where there is negligence and malpractice that occurs at the hospital. And I think one of the greatest pieces of advice that I got when I was kind of going through my situation was the lawyer was like, just be honest. And of course, that's what we're supposed to do, right? Like essentially, when you're being questioned by other lawyers, your best defense one is your documentation and being honest. There are going to be cases out there where there is malpractice and there is negligence, and you have to be honest. You have to tell them what you observed objectively, again, what you wrote down from a documentation standpoint is important as well. But I mean, I don't want anybody to go away from this being like, okay, so, I need to protect my hospital at all costs. No, there's some times where people mess up really bad. And I think that's why we have a legal system to look after these people, to make sure that the process is correct, and that, if there is harm that is done, that the families get what they deserve. Like, I think if harm occurs, then
Mhm.
yeah, if a family's suing for 20 million, they should get 20 million, if that's what it's going to take care of that child because of the injury that occurred.
Mhm.
So again, I think honesty again is the best policy.
Right. And I just wanted to go into a few tips about how to protect yourself from getting sued. So we talked about this Gita Proudman case, but just in general, how you can protect yourself from being sued or from situations sort of snowballing into something really big. So the first one I think is pretty obvious, but it's just to be kind to your patients and their families. So in a lot of case reviews that I've done in the past, it's because number one, the outcome wasn't good, but number two, the family was just really unhappy with how they were treated or how things were explained to them. So, if there's an error that's been made, best practice is always to disclose that error to the family as soon as possible, and ideally by the person that discovered the error. So it's really not helpful to
Absolutely.
hide things when they go wrong, because then when the family finds out later, they completely lose their trust in the healthcare system. So number one is just be honest. If a mistake has occurred, you can say, I'm sorry this has happened. It doesn't mean you're taking responsibility. You're just sorry that it happened, so that they know, you have
Right.
some feelings. You're not just a robot. Like you understand what is happening to them, and it's not good. So just be kind. Number two is knowing your scope of practice. So knowing what you can and can't do. And depending on your level of experience, you might be assigned tasks that you aren't prepared for. So don't hesitate to ask for help, or say that, I'm not trained in this, or I haven't done this for a long time, and get help. Because in a I guess in a court of law, just claiming that you're not familiar with a procedure isn't going to protect you. Um, Anything with medication, really just double check your rights and make sure that the dosage is right. Always go back to the original order to look at it. So don't just give what the previous person gave. You always want to go back to the order, and, do your two client identifiers. Make sure that you have the right patient. So that's really important. And this applies to all patients, but I guess particularly for the elderly. Just do everything you can to prevent falls, because we know that falls is a big one, especially for the elderly. And the number of nurses being
Right.
sued every year because they weren't careful enough, especially with falls, is actually more than we think.
And I mean, I could only imagine how devastating it is to a family to have, um, let's say they came in for care for something unrelated to a fall, and they end up having a severe fall in your care that results in their death. Like, I think
I think, yeah.
that is horrifying, right? I think it's horrifying for any family to deal with. So again, yeah, that disclosure process, the saying that you're sorry is important, and then also taking whatever measures or precautions there are to try to prevent it from ever occurring again.
Yeah, and another piece of advice is just to get clear orders. So best practice is always to get a written order if you can. Verbal orders are only supposed to be used in emergencies, right? So I know that a lot of times the doctor, especially if it's nights and they're on call, they don't want to come in. And
Yeah, I was
I
gonna say, so what if the doctor's not in-house and they've barked at you before for calling? What do we do?
Well, I mean, I think we can't make them come in, but we can get them to repeat back the order if we're not sure what it is. And we can say, like, best practice is for you to come and sign this in person. But if you're not going to do that, I will take a verbal order. But I think it really just depends on your hospital's policy, right? So you can't,
Right,
again, make a physician do something they're not going to do. And the other thing that I don't know if everybody realizes, that physicians aren't actually employees of the hospital. They are
right.
self-employed. They have privileges to work at a hospital. So there's really nothing we can do to force their hand. We can only, you know, talk about best practice, and exactly what we're talking about is the risk that you're taking by not assessing your patient. So,
Right, and that's where I'm gonna just quickly jump in before you miss it, to document. So, you've called the physician, you've told them the state of affairs of what's happening. You've given them your S-bar in terms of the patient's situation, background, what things you've taken to make difference in the care, or what you might be recommending the physician do, or what you want the physician to do. And if they're like, yeah, we're not coming, that's fine. You document it.
Right. And just along the lines of orders, if you get an order that you know is inaccurate or unsafe, you are still that last safety check before it reaches the patient. So if you're getting an order for, let's say, a medication at 10 times the dose that you are comfortable with, it's okay to question that. Just because let's say you're a new nurse or you're new to the team or you're not familiar with this, it's okay to push back because you have a professional responsibility, right? To give the best care to the patient. So if you don't feel comfortable or you know for sure that this is not right, then you need to speak up. And maybe it's going to your charge nurse or your manager or someone, but you just need to make sure you do that and again document. I think if you don't take anything else away from this episode, it's just to document.
And to lawyer up if the police are involved. No joking. Well, yes, definitely that aspect as well. And I think the other part is, again, you also have to think about protecting yourself, and it's not selfish, because I mean, at the end of the day, if you were to now give that dose that was 10 times over, and it did go to a court of law, and you said, well, I gave that order because it was an order and the doctor told me to do it, they'd be like, well, if we told you to jump off a cliff, would you do that too? Like, you've got to use that aspect of critical thinking, and also just like, if you know it's not right, then I mean,
Mhm.
yeah, you need to escalate it up the chain. But I don't think it's not a sufficient answer. I could tell you in a court of law to say, well, it was an order, and that's why I gave it. That's why there's also various different policies and procedures to kind of protect you as the nurse and the organization when orders are incorrect, how to kind of escalate that up the chain of
Right.
command.
And the next one I am guilty of. So, when you're documenting or even in conversation, don't offer personal opinions. So, I've been in situations where, the labor and delivery nurse has brought a baby and a mother up and didn't finish the care. And I was really angry. And I included all of this in my documentation because I was new and I was super angry. And then I sent off a incident report. And then when my manager looked at it, she said, next time just put the facts. I know you're really angry, but you don't want this necessarily on the chart. Think about how you're writing something, and if it was ever read out in a court of law, would you feel comfortable with how you've written it? Because sometimes it just makes
Right.
you seem unreasonable, or that there's emotion here that might have affected your care of this patient. So just stick to the facts. You can write things in quotation marks that you've said or that the patient has said, but try not to use descriptive words like this was a really uncooperative, hard to work with patient. Like, just sort of just be more neutral in how you write things. there's how you there's how
Right,
you
right.
want to write something, and then there's how you actually write something. So those are
Yeah,
different
that's
things.
me. I like write it out first in my, like, I write my anger text, and then I'm like, delete it all and then
Or
rewrite
you
it.
know how they tell you when you break up with someone, you should write a letter to them and then don't send it. It's sort of like that.
Yeah.
I mean, there obviously could be a lot more suggestions, and I think it's just important that we talk about this and make sure people are aware of what can happen. And, just don't be naive to what people's intentions are. So I think in the Gita Proudman case, she probably just kept thinking, like, I did the right thing, and that's why I don't need to get a lawyer. Like, if I just keep telling the truth, then people will eventually see that I did the right thing. But the world doesn't always work
Yeah.
that way.
If you feel that there's something untoward, there's nothing wrong with reaching out to your union and asking, or even getting that first consultation to say, hey, this is the type of situation I'm in. What do you think? I don't think you should ever be in a situation where you're being questioned by law enforcement without having a lawyer present.
Right. Thank you for listening to the Gritty Nurse podcast. If you're listening on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or any other podcast platform, please subscribe, leave us a rating and review. You can also follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter.
And remember, we have a Patreon account, Gritty Nurse. Please contribute anything that you possibly can to continue to help us bring stories of empowerment and enlightenment to you guys. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you. Take care.